The gas station was nearly silent, save for the hum of the overhead lights and the occasional clang of a fuel nozzle returning to its cradle. It was late. Too late, some might say, for a man in a suit to be out alone in a quiet part of town. But Judge Elijah Warren wasn't just any man. He had spent his evening preparing for a complex hearing the next morning, and on his way home, fatigue and a dry throat brought him to this small, flickering station on the edge of the city. He didn't notice the patrol car parked across the lot until he walked out of the store, bottle of water in hand. The officers inside had been watching, suspicious, perhaps, of his presence. Maybe it was the time of night, maybe it was the neighborhood, or maybe it was simply the color of his skin. As he approached his car, the red and blue lights flared to life behind him. He paused, calmly turned, and watched as two uniformed officers stepped out with the rigid confidence of authority unchecked. One of them, a younger officer with a clenched jaw and a hand resting far too comfortably on his holstered weapon, asked him to put his hands where they could see them. The other circled around to the passenger side of Elijah's car. Confused but composed, Elijah identified himself, stating calmly, "I'm Judge Warren. Is there a problem, officers?" His voice was steady, but he'd had this conversation before, too many times before. It didn't matter that he wore a suit, that he sat on the bench of the Superior Court, or that he upheld the very law they claimed to serve. In that moment, he wasn't a judge. He wasn't even a man with a name. He was just another black body in the dark, presumed guilty before a word was spoken. They said he fit the description, said there had been a robbery nearby, asked if they could search his car. He knew his rights, of course, knew them better than most, but years of navigating a biased system had taught him that resistance, even lawful resistance, could come at a high cost. So he complied, jaw tight, hands visible, heart burning. The search turned up nothing, as he knew it would. But it didn't stop them from putting him in cuffs and placing him in the back of their cruiser, the cold steel against his wrists, a cruel reminder of how little his title meant in the eyes of prejudice. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten them with his position. He knew there was no dignity to be salvaged by trying to assert power in a moment built on powerlessness. Instead, he sat in silence as they ran his license, confirmed his identity, and, realizing their mistake, released him with a vague apology and a condescending warning to stay safe out here. He didn't reply. He simply drove home, the sirens still echoing in his ears long after they were gone. The next morning, the courtroom was filled with the usual low murmur of attorneys and clerks preparing for a long docket. Judge Warren walked in through the chamber doors, robes flowing, face composed, but his eyes held the weight of the previous night. The room quieted. All rose. He took his seat at the bench with calm authority. The bailiff called the first case. 2 officers were being brought in for a misconduct hearing, allegations of unlawful stop and racial profiling. Elijah's gaze lifted slowly as the 2 defendants stepped forward. They were the same officers from the night before. For a moment, neither of them seemed to recognize him. They shuffled papers, avoided eye contact, clung to the formality of the courtroom like armor. But as Judge Warren's gaze met theirs, something shifted, a flicker of panic, confusion, then recognition. Their postures straightened. The younger officer's mouth parted slightly, as if to speak, but he thought better of it. Judge Warren did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply looked at them with the calm stillness of a man who had stood in both shadows and light, who had survived systems meant to silence him, and who now held the gavel not out of revenge, but out of responsibility. He cleared his throat. "This court is now in session," he said, his voice firm but not raised. "Today we review the complaint of racial misconduct filed against Officers Randall and Pierce during a stop that occurred last night at approximately 11:47 p.m. I will be presiding." The courtroom froze. The officer's attorney rose, asking if His Honor intended to recuse himself due to personal involvement. Elijah's eyes didn't leave the 2 men in front of him. "No," he said simply. "Because this hearing isn't about personal vendettas. It's about the structure we represent, the oath we take, and the trust we are sworn to protect." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "If I, a sitting judge, can be mistaken for a criminal based on the color of my skin, then what protection exists for the young man in a hoodie, the father walking home from work, the teenager on a bike?" The hearing continued. Surveillance footage was played. The officers' body cams, which they hadn't known were still rolling during part of the encounter, filled the room with the uncomfortable truth. Their words, assumptive, dismissive, left little space for justification. There were no threats, no reasonable suspicion, only perception, only bias. The younger officer fidgeted in his seat as the audio replayed his own voice. Looks like he's casing the place. Too clean cut, doesn't feel right. His partner had said, probably a lawyer type, thinks he's above us. There it was, proof not of crime, but of stereotype, of fear disguised as vigilance, of power used carelessly because it so often goes unchecked. When the testimonies concluded, Judge Warren looked around the courtroom. His voice, when it came again, was quiet, but every word was a stone. You wear a badge, he said, not for control, not for dominance, but to protect. That badge should mean something sacred. But last night you treated it like a weapon. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I won't punish you to soothe my own pride, but I will hold you accountable. Because the system must correct itself, or it will collapse under its own injustice. He ordered both officers suspended without pay, enrolled in racial sensitivity and de-escalation training, and required to complete 100 hours of community service in underserved neighborhoods. But more than that, he left them with words they wouldn't forget. I hope the next time you see a black man at a gas station, he said, you'll see a human being before you see a threat. And with that, he stood, gavel down, justice served, not out of bitterness, but with dignity. As he walked back into his chambers, alone, Elijah Warren allowed himself one long, quiet breath, but because, for once, truth had stood taller than prejudice. Not because the battle was over,